this. And so I tried to make my way through reading the classics that are all written in polemical form. Tried to make my way through reading them without knowing the context, and it was very, very difficult. And there's one incident or period that gets referenced a lot by Marxists when they're going over the history of their movement that often is not explained. And that is the crisis of Marxism. You'll often hear people referencing the crisis of Marxism. What are they talking about when they say the crisis of Marxism? And shout out to MAGA Economic Forum. Much love. The crisis of Marxism. That's not a reference to the capitalist crisis, the crisis of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profits, the capitalists producing so many goods that the workers can't buy back what they produce. That's not what it's referring to. The crisis of Marxism refers to the events that preceded the First World War. In the lead up to the First World War, 1900, 1910, 1905, the First World War broke out in 1914. The global Marxist movement experienced a period of confusion that is widely referred to as the crisis of Marxism. And the confusion and the crisis was this. Marxism, communist ideas, the labor movement, belief and advocacy of socialism was everywhere. In America, you had Eugene Debs and the Socialist Party. They were talking about socialism everywhere. In Britain, you had the Labour Party. They were talking about socialism everywhere, getting elected to parliament. In Germany, you had the world's largest Marxist party, the Social Democratic Party, the SDP, SPD. France, Austria. Marxism was everywhere in Europe and in the United States and in Australia and in the industrial Western countries of the world. Marxism was proliferating and spreading like wildfire. It was everywhere. But the communist revolution was not happening. And the economy was not operating in the way that Marx had predicted. Millions of people were becoming Marxists. Millions of people were joining labor unions. And real reforms were being won. The 12-hour workday was created. Universal male suffrage was created in most Western countries, meaning that every man got to vote. They weren't even thinking about letting women vote, but every man, regardless of whether or not he owned any property, got to vote. In Germany, in particular, you saw a dramatic amount of reforms that were won. A national health service was created by the German Kaiser. A kindergarten system was created where little kids got to go to daycare for free by the German government. Labor unions were winning union contracts on the job. Socialists were getting elected to office and enacting policies. Marxism was everywhere. But the revolution wasn't happening. Meanwhile, the economy was not changing in the way that Marx had predicted. Marx had shown that in capitalism, the worker is constantly being replaced by the machine. The capitalist wants to pay as little as possible for every product he creates, and he wants to make as many products as he possibly can. And this has a built-in problem that the worker cannot buy back what he's produced. The amount of wages paid out are always less than what the worker would need in order to buy back the product. And this problem of the worker being unable to consume what he produces, the problem of overproduction, it gets compounded by the introduction of technology. Technology creates a situation where this problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the problem that is ever present in capitalism of people being homeless because there are too many houses, people being hungry because there is too much food. The coal miner's riddle, the little boy saying to his father, "Why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the boy says, "Why can we not afford any coal?" The father says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine." The little boy says, "Why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there is too much coal." Poverty created by abundance, this built-in problem of capitalism, Marx predicted would become more and more exacerbated. Fewer and fewer workers would be hired to work at the assembly line. More and more products would be churned out, which couldn't be sold, resulting in economic crises. Society would become less and less stable until finally the working class, the reserve army of labor, the growing, desperately poor and unemployed workers, would band together and seize control of the government. And then with the government in their hands, they would then seize control of the means of production, and the banks and the factories and the industries would be forced to operate according to a central plan, and this problem would be overcome with the socialist revolution. That's what Marx had predicted. And Marx advocated the breaking down of national barriers. You're on the list. Marx said that the Germans and the French and the Austrians and the Britons should band together, workers of the world united, that national barriers were a mechanism for dividing the working class, but international solidarity would reign. But this wasn't happening. In the lead up to World War I, capitalism was becoming more stable, not less stable. Economic crises were becoming less frequent. And in addition to that, living standards for many working class people, especially those who worked in so-called skilled trades, were rising. So this whole situation created a moment where all the global communists and Marxist thinkers were sitting back and going, what's going on? It was a moment that was very perplexing. Why was it that their movement was bigger than it had ever been? The labor unions were bigger, the socialist parties and the socialist groups were bigger. But the revolution of the working class wasn't happening, and the economic results that Marx had predicted were not happening either. And this is the period in which we call the crisis of Marxism, because something was clearly wrong. Something was clearly not right. They had to go back to the drawing board. Now, one school of thought was called revisionism. started by Edward Bernstein. Edward Bernstein said that the reason that we weren't seeing the revolution and the reason we weren't seeing the economic consequences is because capitalism is just kind of naturally turning into socialism. Now that we have universal male suffrage, every man can vote. There's more working class men than there are capitalist men. So eventually the capitalist men will be outvoted by the working class men. And one step at a time, socialism is coming out of capitalism. The creation of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, the 12-hour workday, the creation of public education, all of this was little building blocks. And that capitalism in the West wasn't having a big economic crisis, Edward Bernstein argued, because it was just kind of naturally turning into socialism. And that there wouldn't be a revolution. It would be a gradual process. Socialism, Edward Bernstein argued, would be the mere sum of reforms. He called for evolutionary socialism as opposed to revolutionary socialism. He said, the movement is everything, and the goal is nothing. There won't be an event horizon, a clear event where the working class takes power from the capitalists. It'll just kind of be a gradual process as Western countries become more democratic, as working class people become more politicized, as more reforms and progressive laws are passed. Gradually, the Western countries are going to turn into socialist countries, and that's why we're not seeing the economic crisis the way Marx predicted, and that's how it is, and that this makes colonialism and imperialism a good thing because these advanced Western countries are spreading their modern and progressive capitalism that's gradually turning into socialism. They're spreading that to Africa. They're spreading that to South America. They're spreading that to Asia. That was their teaching. Well, the global Marxist movement largely rejected Edward Bernstein. And Karl Kautsky was the leader of the German Marxists who rallied the global Marxist movement to reject revisionism, to reject Kautsky. That was one response. You also had the individual named George Sorel. And George Sorel said that the problem that the Marxist movement was facing was a spiritual problem. That by building huge labor unions, by building huge socialist parties that were winning elections and taking seats in parliaments, by having huge socialist marching bands and socialist choirs, socialist kindergartens and socialist bowling leagues, and by making Marxism a mass movement as it was in the United States. You look back in the history of the United States, most cities had multiple socialist choirs and marching bands. Most cities had multiple socialist baseball teams and baseball leagues. I mean, by making socialism a mass movement, where socialists were getting elected and becoming mayors and members of city council, by doing that, they were watering down socialism's revolutionary content. And that revolutions are not made, George Sorel argued, by mass movements of people. And that by building a mass movement, you would water down Marxism and it would lose its spiritual power. But instead, you should focus on building a group of violent, heroic men. People who would become dedicated adherents of Marxism, who would engage in violence, and with their violence enact spiritual power and inspire people. And it was instead the job of revolutionaries to build an isolated group of violent men who were motivated by their masculinity, by their desire to be heroic in battle, and by their belief in mythology. That was the way to change society. And George Sorel developed a following in France, particularly among anarchists and the wing of the labor movement they called syndicalists, the people who rejected voting and said that only workplace confrontations were the answer. The people who rejected signing union contracts because they said that meant that the boss had the right to exploit you. It meant recognizing the capitalist. And George Sorel formed a following with his spiritual critique of Marxism, arguing that they should instead be focused on building an isolated group of men who engaged in violence, emphasized their masculinity, and were motivated by myth and legend. And that's Sorelianism. It was popular among anarchists and syndicalists, and eventually, out of Sorelianism, you got Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was a student of George Sorel and an adherent of his theories. But we all know that the most important development that came out of the crisis of Marxism was Bolshevism. And that Vladimir Lenin looked at what was happening in Europe, looked at the crisis of Marxism, and he had the answer. He said that the reason, there you go, you're on the list. He said that the reason that capitalism was not having the economic crisis that Marx had predicted was because it was moving into its monopoly stage of imperialism. That the capitalist corporations, the industrial corporations of the Western countries were being subjected to the domination of banks, that finance was becoming dominant over industry, and that blocks, monopolistic associations, trusts, cartels, and syndicates based in the Western countries were spreading their tentacles all across the planet. They were seizing parts of the developing world and using them to dump their excess commodities. They were exporting capital rather than exporting products. Instead of exporting French fries, they were exporting McDonald's. Instead of exporting tires, they were exporting Goodyear. The corporations themselves were spreading themselves across the planet, and this new international financial oligarchy was emerging to dominate global capitalism. And in doing so, it was spreading Western capitalism all over the planet and holding back development in the third world. And that this is why the economic crisis that Marx had predicted was not coming through, because now they had fresh virgin lands, new markets to export their products to, fresh fields of exploitation. And so they were being bailed out by subduing the third world. China became a playground for Wall Street corporations to sell their opium. Africa became a new field where, we saw the European settlers rolling in. The Boer War took place. We saw Rhodesia set up as a colonial settler apartheid state. And that, all across the Philippines, we saw the USA violently seizing the Philippines. We can all recall that. And the Philippine-American War, the U.S. Marines were sent to the Philippines, killed 500,000 people to keep the Philippines underdeveloped and under the domination of Western corporations. Many corners of the world, we were seeing the Western imperialists seize control. The Congo was seized by Belgium, right? And in the Belgian Congo, we saw vicious exploitation of the African people to create rubber for the rubber plantations of the Belgian king, King Leopold, and horrendous crimes, millions of people killed. And as imperialism moved into the stage, as capitalism moved into the stage of imperialism, it was stabilizing. So that was Lenin's first discovery. Lenin's second discovery was that part of the transition to imperialism was the cultivation of a layer of working class people in the homeland who were becoming bought off. They were being bribed, essentially, by the imperialists. That there was a layer of workers who were in labor unions who called themselves socialists, but because of the fact that they got higher pay than other workers, because of the fact that they were considered to be skilled, because of the fact that they were English speaking or not foreign born, the fact that they were Protestant, they weren't Catholic, for whatever reason. In Britain, in France, in Germany, in the United States, in Australia, in the Western imperialist countries, The working class was becoming stratified, with one section of the working class seeing its living standards dramatically increase as a result of imperialism. The capitalists could afford to pay them better wages. And so they became the aristocracy of labor. They were still workers, and they were still being exploited on the job, but they were being paid a higher amount, and so they were less interested in supporting other workers. They tended to support the wars the capitalists waged around the world. They tended to not support the labor unions of lower paid workers. They'd look down on them and say, oh, those are a bunch of immigrants. Those are a bunch of black people. Those are a bunch of Irish people. We don't want to support them. We're skilled workers. We're privileged. Those are mere industrial workers. And that a section of the working class was bought off. And in addition to that, a section of the labor union movement, of the leaders of the labor union movement and the leaders of socialist groups were also being bought off. Some of these labor union bosses would get invited to have dinner with the president of the United States or with the prime minister in Britain. Some of these socialists would get jobs in mainstream newspapers like the New York Times or the Times of London. They would get jobs at universities teaching their socialist and economic theories at the university. And so in addition to strata of the working class being bought off and getting higher wages, leaders of the working class movement were also being bought off. And in addition to the aristocracy of labor, you had the social imperialists, the cultivation of social reformists and social imperialists. You're on the list. And the social reformists and the social imperialists who dominated the labor unions and the socialist groups, and the aristocracy of labor that dominated the working class movement and didn't want to have solidarity with the lower paid workers, the so-called unskilled workers, the foreign-born workers, the non-white workers. This was why the communist revolution was not happening in the Western capitalist countries. Capitalism was stabilizing because of imperialism, and the working class movement was becoming divided and manipulated by the aristocracy of labor and by social reformism and social imperialism. And that this was the basis of the crisis of Marxism. And Vladimir Lenin observed this. And so he said, what do we do? He says, well, this means that the revolutionary energy is not going to be in Europe. It's not going to be in France and Germany. It's not going to be in America. The revolutionary energy in the 20th century is going to be in Africa. It's going to be in Asia. It's going to be in Latin America. It's going to be in Russia. It's going to be in places where whole countries are being kept poor by the imperialists. And it'll be struggles not for the worker against the employer that will lead to the creation of socialism, but it'll be the struggle of entire nations to break free from imperialism. That will be the basis. That will be the basis of socialist revolutions. The working class will lead the entire nation, the peasants of the nation, the capitalists of the nation. It'll lead the entire nation. The working class will lead the entire nation to break free from the domination of the imperialists. So what Marx said about how all nationalism is bad, nope, we get rid of that. Nationalism of the oppressed is good. Nationalism of the imperialists is not good. National chauvinism, the desire of the French imperialists to dominate the whole world, or the British or the American imperialists to dominate the whole world, their belief that they were superior, that's national chauvinism. We reject any form of national chauvinism, but among oppressed nations, among the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Asians, the Africans, the people of South America, their nationalism, fighting for the liberation of their nation, that's a good thing. Nationalism of the oppressed is a good thing. That was Lenin's breakthrough. And these new theories that Lenin developed were a response to the first crisis of Marxism. Things weren't going, the way the Marxist movement was operating wasn't working. It wasn't working. And so he said, all right, we got to change a few things. We got to go back to the drawing board. We need to understand why the economy has changed. All right, here's my understanding of how the economy has changed. All right, here's my understanding of why the revolutionary energy is not in the first world, it's in the third world. All right, Lenin saw the crisis of Marxism and he had the solution. And what happened as a result of that? Well, we know that the reformism and the stratification and the buying off of the working class movement in the imperialist countries led to World War I. 1914, all the socialist parties sold out and supported World War I. But the Bolsheviks in Russia didn't support World War I. And in fact, they said that the war is a great opportunity. They said, we're going to turn the imperialist war into civil war. We're going to tell the working class to turn their guns around. We'll say it's time to make war against the war makers. Instead of waging an imperialist war, we're going to wage a class war. That was the message of the Bolsheviks. Turn your guns around, make war against the war makers. Turn imperialist war into civil war. And the Bolsheviks understood that imperialism, this new phase of capitalism, had changed the game. The Bolsheviks understood that nationalism of oppressed people was a good thing and not a bad thing. And based on that, the Bolsheviks made a revolution. And we had the 20th century communist movement. Out of the nightmare, the confusion, the setbacks of the crisis of Marxism, we got dramatic breakthroughs. You can imagine how those Marxists in Europe felt. They must have been sitting there so frustrated. It doesn't make any sense. Our movement is everywhere. We're not having a revolution. Our groups are growing by leaps and bounds. We're not having a revolution. Furthermore, our economic theories are not coming true. What is going on? And then the revolutionary working class watched as the socialist parties sold out and became reformists and started supporting wars, and World War I broke out. And there was a huge period where it seemed like the Marxist movement was just falling apart because it wasn't delivering, and they didn't know what to do. And there was a period of confusion. And even though there was this huge socialist movement, very few Marxists, very few socialists understood what was going on. Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, Eugene Debs, William Z. Foster, they stood alone. The bulk of the working class movement was confused and lost. And in that time, what did Lenin say to do? He said to his followers, it's time to go lower and deeper to the real masses. Don't waste your time on the lost sheep. Don't waste your time trying to convince the social democrats to become better. Don't waste your time trying to convince the reformist sellout labor union bosses to become revolutionary. No. You need to go to the people that have not joined the Marxist movement yet. You need to go to those hungry workers who are suffering. You need to go to those oppressed people that are struggling. Forget the labor movement. Forget the Socialist Party and the Labor Party in Britain. Go lower and deeper to the real masses. Go lower and deeper to the real masses. That is the future of the movement. And that was the first crisis of Marxism. And understanding that crisis and understanding that is so important to understanding everything. It's because of the crisis of Marxism that there are socialist parties in Europe and communist parties in Europe. The communist parties were formed as the people who followed Lenin and his teachings. And the socialist parties were the ones that had sold out and supported the war. The crisis of Marxism is so important to understand, and I do see the Rumble rant that came in from Jamie Turner, and I'm following everything, and the super chats are coming in, and I do see Hemp Carr in the Rockfin. You're all on the list, don't worry. The socialist parties and the understanding of imperialism, all of this comes out of the crisis of Marxism. And that crisis of Marxism, it sucked. It absolutely sucked. World War I, 20 million workers being sent to their deaths. Socialist groups that were big and massive, failing to deliver and proving that they couldn't make a revolution. It all sucked. But it was from that crisis of Marxism that we got the radical new understanding that we came to call Marxism-Leninism. And we got the Great Russian Revolution, millions of people lifted out of poverty, the Soviet Union becoming a powerhouse country, the Chinese Revolution, China building itself up, African liberation struggles in Latin America. It was out of the crisis of Marxism. And because of the boldness of some individuals who had the willingness and the understanding, you're on the list, the willingness and the understanding to look at the crisis and reconfigure things. It was because of their boldness and their brilliance in doing so that we were able to change course and rebound, and we saw the dramatic victories of the 20th century that happened. The crisis forced us to think. It forced us to reconfigure, figure things out. It showed us where everyone stood. It showed us who was our real friends and who was our enemies. It was a dramatic but necessary moment, the first crisis of Marxism. Now, the reason that I've been telling you this for the last 45 minutes is because I believe that we are now, in 2023, living in the second crisis of Marxism. And let me add, I don't believe after the fall of the Soviet Union, many people said that the fall of the Soviet Union, the 1990s, this is the new crisis of Marxism. Bullocks. I don't buy it. No, we are now living in the full-on crisis of Marxism. The fall of the Soviet Union, we had a big defeat. The Soviet Union fell. Eastern Bloc countries fell. There was a lot of confusion, but the capitalist economy rebounded and all of that. The crisis of Marxism had not yet matured. That was maybe the fall of the Soviet Union was the beginning of the second crisis of Marxism. But we are now in the eye of the storm. The second great crisis of Marxism is upon us. The same place that the Bolsheviks were in the lead up to World War I, we are in right now. We are in the eye of the storm. We are in the eye of the storm. Why? Why are we in the eye of the storm? Because everything should be going our way. There's a big capitalist crisis. Living standards are dropping. The working class is angry and ready to fight. They hate the government. They don't want to fight the wars. They question things. And yet, Marxism and communism, despite being more popular than ever with people on the internet, despite a widespread interest, our movement is not gaining any ground. The working class is not winning great victories. We're not moving toward a socialist revolution. This is the exact same situation. It is a return of the crisis of Marxism. Just like in the early 1900s, socialist and communist groups were everywhere, but they weren't seeing the revolution they expected. The economy wasn't acting the way they expected, and we're back in this spot. Now the economy is acting the way we expected. We have a prolonged crisis of overproduction, the greatest crisis in the history of capitalism. Artificial intelligence and the computer revolution and these breakthroughs have driven everything that Karl Marx wrote about technology and the worker competing with the machine and poverty created by abundance, the problem of overproduction. All of that is more true now. It is 1,000 times more true now than it was in Karl Marx's day, right? We are living in a moment where it's very, very, very clear that everything Karl Marx wrote about how capitalism cannot handle technological advances and how the capitalist system has this built-in problem of overproduction, all of this is more true than it has ever been before. But yet, the socialist and communist movements are not gaining ground in the Western countries. And furthermore, there's widespread interest in Marxism among the population. And in addition to that, there is widespread opposition to the status quo. Widespread opposition to the status quo, widespread questioning of mainstream media, widespread opposition to the wars. But yet, Marxism as a movement isn't growing. Well, the reason that the Center for Political Innovation, despite being so small and so new, has shaken the ground. We have created an earthquake among global Marxists. Everybody knows who we are. They are all talking about us. People in Finland are writing statements about the Center for Political Innovation. I don't know if you saw that. People in Sweden, people in Greece are writing statements that mention the name of the Center for Political Innovation. They do interviews with members of the Center for Political Innovation on TV in Iran, on TV in Russia. When we had a conference in Texas, they had to create a page about it on trutherfiction.com because the videos of it got shared so many places. They had to confirm it wasn't an internet hoax, that it actually happened. We had a conference in Chicago last summer, and Newsweek ran an article about it. We are a tiny organization. We have 112 members as of today, but yet everything we do shakes the world. And there's a demand on everyone who calls themselves a socialist or a communist to denounce us. First, the memo got sent out that we were pat socks, patriotic socialists. And why wouldn't we be patriotic? The whole point is to, make the country better with socialism. You cannot be an internationalist without being a patriot, and you cannot be a true patriot without being an internationalist. You can't love your homeland without loving the world and wanting it to get along with countries around the world. You cannot love the world without loving your homeland and wanting your homeland to get along and be more prosperous. There is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism. We should always reject national chauvinism, but we should also reject national nihilism. It is our duty to show that we love the people of our country. So, of course, we're patriotic, but we're not a special brand. We're not a new formation called patriotic socialism. We're just rational people that say, hey, if we want to lead the United States of America, we ought to love the United States of America, want to make life better in the United States of America. And as soon as this became a widespread view, immediately there was a demand on every socialist and communist in America: denounce the pat socks, denounce the pat socks. You must denounce patriotic socialism. There was a demand that went out everywhere. Anyone who talks of socialism with American characteristics, anyone who talks of patriotic socialism must be condemned. This must not be allowed. It was everywhere. Everywhere. It was just widespread. It was this universal memo that was just sent out everywhere. Patriotic socialism, socialism with American characteristics, whatever it is, it's bad. And it was demanded on every 15-year-old who got interested in communism, every 12-year-old in Minnesota who started, dressing up like Che Guevara because they thought it was edgy. They were all told immediately. The memo went out, what Caleb is doing and what the Center for Political Innovation is doing, you must denounce it. It is unacceptable. You must denounce it. They're bad. They're bad. They're bad. They're bad. It's weird. Because, I mean, at that point, I don't think we even had 30 members at that point. I don't think we had 20 members at that point. We had just gotten started. We hadn't even had a national gathering yet. And already we shook the earth. We shook the ground, and everyone, it was demanded of everyone that we be condemned because they saw that we were just like Lenin. We were starting to solve the crisis of Marxism. We were starting to solve the puzzle. The reason that Marxism could not capture the anger of the working class in the Western countries during the economic crisis is because Marxism had become dominated by middle class feelings of alienation. Instead of being a voice of working class people who wanted their lives to improve, Marxism had turned into a way for middle class people to express their alienation from society. Marxism had become a way that one could live in the prosperous West and tell everyone that you were alienated, that you felt like the odd one out, you felt like no one understood you, you felt like you didn't fit in. Marxism became a vehicle when the Western countries, especially the United States, defined themselves as being anti-communist. To become a communist became a statement of one's alienation and isolation and nonconformity from society. And that was why, that's one of the major reasons that Marxism can't become a vehicle for a mass working class movement to improve their living conditions, because it had been transformed over the course of the Cold War to, at least in Western countries, become a manifestation of nonconformity and isolation. And that is not the recipe for a mass movement. You don't build a mass movement of millions of people on the basis of I don't fit in. You don't build a mass movement of millions of people on the basis of I feel like no one likes me. I feel like I don't want to be like it. That's not how you build a mass movement. And that was one of the main roadblocks. And so patriotic socialism was a torpedo fired to break apart this roadblock. And we said, no, Marxism is not a means of saying that you don't fit in, that you want to be non-conforming, that you're angry at the country you live in. We will create a Marxist movement that says we want to save America. We don't want to destroy America, that socialism will make a better life, and that joining arm in arm with the people of the world to have a better country will be good for everyone. We will demolish this first roadblock to revolution. We will leap over this first hurdle. And with the innovation of patriotic socialism, our community took the first steps toward doing what the Bolsheviks had done, renegotiating the rules of the game, developing a new formulation in order to overcome the crisis and operate in the new playing field. Well, as you can see, our innovation of patriotic socialism, on the one hand, it may have led to all kinds of people being pressured to denounce us and pressured to oppose us, but it also led us into the Rage Against the War Machine coalition. It also led us to recruiting the best of the best of people that want the same thing that we do, a mass movement, not simply a statement of nonconformity. And it led to the seeds of what has now blossomed as the Center for Political Innovation being planted. We fired that first torpedo with patriotic socialism. And what was the next torpedo we fired? Well, somebody, somewhere, mean, it wasn't a huge discovery because I was not at all private about doing it. I never tried to cover it up. Somebody somewhere discovered that I had met with Russian intellectual Alexander Dugin. I was not ashamed of that. I met Russian intellectual Alexander Dugin once, and I met his daughter, Dari Dugina, on many different occasions. And somebody discovered this, and mass hysteria was again whipped up. In addition to condemning us for our patriotism, how dare Caleb meet with this important philosopher in Russia? This cannot be. Alexander Dugin is a fascist. He is a neo-Nazi. He's all these things, which he is not. And the memo got sent out. What they were really saying was not that it was a crime that I met with one Russian philosopher. Rather, they were saying it is a crime to align yourself with Russia. It is a crime to align yourself with Iran. It is a crime to align yourself with the countries around the world that have broken out of Western capitalism. And they may have made somewhat of an exception for Vietnam or Cuba or Venezuela or countries that are nominally Marxist, or at least call themselves Marxist. But to meet with Russians, to meet with Iranians, to meet with Baathist Arab socialists in the Middle East, that had to be straight out condemned. And then immediately, the memo once again got sent out. Oh my God, Caleb Maupin, the Center for Political Innovation, them's bad people, them's bad folks. Caleb met with this Russian intellectual. Oh my God, he met with a non-Marxist Russian intellectual who we all decided is a fascist, even though we know nothing about him. And oh my God, blah 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 blah. All this insanity. And what did we do? We said no. The revolutionary energy right now is in the new economy that is developing around the world. And Russia and China are the center of it. They are the linchpin of it. And Iran is part of it. And the BRICS is part of it. And the Bolivarian countries of Latin America are part of it. And the axis of resistance in the Middle East is part of it. And if you're a serious anti-imperialist, you got to be part of it. So at the same time that you don't give the middle finger to your own people and reject patriotism, you got to also embrace the sections of the world that are resisting the domination of the imperialists. So there we go. Another torpedo was fired. This memo that one cannot associate with the emerging anti-imperialist bloc, or maybe you can as long as they call themselves Marxists, but you probably should. No, that second roadblock to revolution, that memo that got sent out that says you can't stand in solidarity with anti-imperialist forces around the world, another torpedo was fired, and kaboom, that second roadblock was demolished. And soon we were headed to Nicaragua. Soon we were headed to Russia. And soon our members were sending messages to the Donetsk People's Republic, and great things have happened. Great things have happened because we broke through that second roadblock. And this all has culminated in the development of a new set of beliefs that we refer to as the city building tendency. And in the United States, the city building tendency is very unique. No one else talks the way we do. We've got Friends, People's Party, Libertarian Party, Party of Communists, American Student Union. We've got Friends. But our message is pretty unique. But if you go to the developing world, our message isn't that unique at all. Communist parties sound like us in most of the world. In India, the communists sound like us. Latin America, the communists sound like us. Most of the world, what we say is pretty much common sense. But in America, it's pretty unique. And then the war in Ukraine escalated. We made clear what side we were on. We made clear that Russia was right and the U.S.-backed proxies in Kiev were wrong. And again, we were roundly condemned and attacked And at this point, though we are small, at this point, though we are limited in our resources, we have the foundations of a real political movement already laid. We have before us the foundations of a whole new paradigm. We have with us the foundations of a whole new world, of a whole new breakthrough. What Bolshevism did, we are doing, at least in the Western world, for Marxism. We have created a whole new brand, a whole new strand. With our innovation on the question of patriotism, with our innovation on the question of anti-imperialist solidarity, with our innovation in terms of having exciting public events and conferences, printing exciting books, with our innovation on the question of religion and embracing religious faith, we have laid the foundations for a whole new castle to be built. We have constructed a whole new ideological paradigm, and we are building a whole new movement. And everyone talks about us nonstop. Nonstop, they talk about us. They have to talk about us because no one's doing the innovative work that we are doing. We are the resolution to the second crisis of Marxism. We understand why the Soviet Union fell. We understand why the Western Marxist movement is impotent and failing. We understand that it's time to go lower and deeper to the real masses, or out of the movement to the masses. We understand the division between the new right and the lower levels of capital and the ultra-rich financial oligarchy and the power struggle that's laying the basis for the political turmoil in the Western world. We have a new understanding, and that gives us the ability to operate in this new playing field. We are doing a huge amount of cutting-edge pioneering work, and we are building a movement that has captured the imaginations and irked the frustrations of literally millions and millions of people. There are millions of people who know about the Center for Political Innovation. There are millions of people who pay close attention to what the Center for Political Innovation does. And in addition to that, there are millions of people who are furious and say, it can't be allowed, it must be stopped. People in the countries of the world that are struggling against imperialism, they know all about us. You can be sure they know about us in Russia. I'm on RT every day. That conference that we did in Texas and in Chicago, the rallies that we've had where we unfurl the flag, they know all about us in Russia. And they know all about us in China. Also, when I confronted Sa Ing-wen, when our summit against hypocrisy that was had in opposition to Joe Biden's Summit for Democracy, you can be sure they know all about us in China. I'm currently discussing having my book, Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution, published in Chinese. That's how much they know about us. They know about us in Iran. I get requests from Iranian state media all the time. There are Iranians retweeting and reading our content. I've been to Iran. I have a whole documentary film. People know all about us in Iran. And people know all about us in Venezuela and Nicaragua as well. We've sent delegations. We've participated in important solidarity actions. People know all about us in the Korean Peninsula. You can be sure of that. The North Koreans have republished articles by me in their daily newspaper I'm followed by all of the accounts, promoting peace on the Korean Peninsula. They have seen our banner unfurled at the White House. They have seen our protest calling for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. They know about us on the Korean Peninsula. Revolutionary anti-imperialist governments and forces all over the world that represent literally millions of people are paying close attention to what we are doing and following our work and consider us to be the cream of the crop in America. Meanwhile, you can be sure that everything we do, every time we update the CPI website, they're reading it over at the Jacobin office. I can guarantee you this. In the headquarters of Jacobin, they are looking over everything we do very carefully. What is CPI up to? What are they doing now? Those bastards, what are they doing now? What are these bastards in CPI? And you can be sure in the DSA headquarters, they watch our every move. What's CPI doing now? What are they doing? What are they doing? All right, let's have our new member that, let's have Black Red Guard do a hit piece on them. He just joined. He's kind of a Maoist. Maybe they'll listen to him. Okay. They're watching us closely in the DSA headquarters. We know that we live rent-free in the minds of the Communist Party USA. At 23rd Street in Manhattan, at their headquarters, they think about us constantly. They've published articles on their website. They're constantly kicking people out for supposedly being in CPI. There's people who've never been in CPI, who never were in CPI, and they got kicked out of the Communist Party, and they contacted us. Hey, I'd never heard of you guys, but the Communist Party just expelled me because they think I'm secretly part of your organization. Can you tell me what you're all about? That's us, folks. That's us. You're on the list, Maxwell. Good question. That's us. We are so important that there have been various social media influencers who have had to copy us. I've had to hijack some of our talking points and rhetoric so that they can put on a better social media performance art. We don't necessarily mind. We like people talking about the way we talk. But there's a difference between us and these influencers, which is that they are putting on a show on social media and we are building a real organization. We're building a real network of people. We're working together and trying to achieve real goals, carry out real operations. And that we're never going to go all in on social conservatism. We do not hate gay people. We do not hate trans people. We welcome them in our midst. Some of us have a religious objection or a political feminist or whatever objection to different lifestyles, but that is our business. We leave our personal life at the door. Our rule is drawn from the U.S. Constitution. No religious test. Your personal life is your own business. We take no position on abortion. We take no position on gay marriage or on the transgender question. We take no position on the sex work question. We aren't in this to talk about sex, and we're not in this to regulate people's private personal lives. We are in this to battle for the economic rebirth of the country and to defeat the imperialists. That's why we're in this. That's why we're in this. And we're not in this to put on a silly show. And the way we do things may not always be conducive to the social media entertainment world. We may not put on the best whiz-bang social media show because we're trying to build a real network. But we have the foundations of a real movement here. We have a group of very dedicated people. Why do you think there's a morning message every single day? Every single day we have a morning message. Every single day. Look at the people who make those morning messages from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different age groups, different demographics. Every single day we have a morning message. Every single day we have a morning message that comes out. Every single day. That shows what kind of community we are. The Center for Political Innovation is unique. And we have to see ourselves as the pioneers marching out of the second great crisis of Marxism, innovating and blazing new trail and coming to new conclusions. That's what we have to see ourselves as doing. We are the pioneers. We are the pioneers of 21st century socialism. We are the pioneers of revolutionary, anti-imperialist working class organizing in the West. And what we are doing is unique and special. And what we are doing is valuable. And the world realizes it. And the phonies and the frauds are threatened by us. And with our meager resources and our limited number of members, we are moving mountains. We are literally moving mountains. We are the subject. We are not the object. We're not reacting. People are reacting to us. We are the force that sets the tone that all other forces have to contend with. What we do sets the tone for what others do. If you have any doubt about how special and important we are, you should stop, because we have proven ourselves to be the revolutionary subject. And on that note, I do want to conclude my opening remarks for tonight by pointing this out. I love you. I love you. I'm dead serious. I love you. That may be a silly thing to say, but to all of you watching right now, I love you. In fact, that's why I gave the stream the title. The title. You're on the list, Alex. The title I gave it. Our organization is held together by love. Che Guevara said that revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love. And he was right. Our organization is bonded together by love. There is a special love that I have for each and every one of you. Even those of you that might be hate watching me right now, I still love you. And anyone who comes around our community can smell this. They can get a feeling of it. There's a special love that we have in the Center for Political Innovation. There is just a special love that is here. Justin Watson knows it, right? And if you've ever been to one of our in real life events, it's just, there is a special, special love in this community. And this love is something that some people have a hard time dealing with. People think they understand this on an intellectual level. They think they understand this on an intellectual level, but then they come around the community and they feel the love. And the love hits them. It hits them in the heart, it hits them in the brain, it hits them in the stomach, it hits them in the head to the toe. They can feel that love. And the love that they feel, not everyone reacts positively to love. The love that people feel when they come around sometimes causes people to have a breakdown. There are people who came around and the love was so massive and the love was so huge and they felt that love and it scared them. They were afraid they might fall head over heels. They were afraid they might become drunk with love, that they might fall apart. And some of the people, unfortunately, that have betrayed our community or left our community, they were reacting to the love. They couldn't handle the love. And they were honest with me. There's some people who have left, not in a negative way, not left in a hateful way, not spoken negatively of us, but have just straight up told me, Caleb, I can't handle the love. I'm not ready for the love that this community has to offer. It's the saddest thing, but it's true. It's absolutely true. This love that we have, it can be overwhelming. It can be too much for people. It can scare people. Because when you're in love, you lose control. When you're in love, you make sacrifices that you wouldn't otherwise make. When you're in love, it's dangerous. It is dangerous to be in love. I'm honest with you. I'm not denying that. It is very dangerous to be in love. It is very dangerous to feel the kind of spiritual power and connection that we have. It's not easy. It is not a safe intellectual place to be. Right? Ask Elizabeth Young. Right? This is somebody who has done so much for our community. She's become so dedicated to what we did. We elevated her to the rank of president because she was so dedicated to it. But she'll tell you that it's not about an intellectual attachment to our ideas, though she has one. It's about something deeper. And that something deeper, when you feel it, when it first comes over you, it can be overwhelming. It can scare you. It can terrify you. You can say to yourself, if I go all into this, I don't know if I'll be able to get out. If I can attach myself to the love that's here, I don't know what I'll become. I don't know where I'll go. I don't know what I'm going to do. The love can be too much for people. The love can scare people. And we can be honest about that. If you join DSA, you ain't going to get the love like this. All right? You lurk in an internet community with some influencer you like, you ain't going to get the love that we have. That might feel a lot safer. It might feel a whole lot safer. And I understand that. And I understand that some people are not ready for the love that our community has to offer. And I have to just understand that. I have to just reconcile with that fact. Right? We live in a heartless world. We live in a world where people get betrayed and taken advantage of and manipulated, where people get scammed and conned, where people get scarred, and that people aren't ready for the kind of love we have to offer. And I can understand that. And I can't blame them for that. And it breaks my heart. And I hope that those who aren't ready for the love we have to offer can change. And I hope that they can open up. I hope that they can open up, and I hope that they can be prepared for what we have to offer someday. But all I can do is keep building and keep teaching and keep trying to accomplish things and keep trying to carry out the tasks that need to be done. That is all I can do. And that's all you can do. But it's this love and this dedication and this connection that gives us the ability to do things other groups can't do. Gives us the ability to make discoveries that other organizations and other thinkers can't make. Gives us the ability to carry out operations that other people could only dream of carrying out. So take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. That's all I can say. Take it or leave it. If you're not ready now, come back when you are. If you are ready now, I embrace you. I embrace you, and we'll try not to get too dizzy. Right? Stalin, he wrote a famous speech called Dizzy with Success, talking about how when they carried out the amazing achievements they carried out in industrialization, they became dizzy with success. They made mistakes because they were just so enamored with their own successes that they overlooked problems that needed to be fixed. We don't want to get dizzy with success. We don't want to get dizzy with love. We want to understand that what we're doing has power, and the same kind of power that can turn on your electrical lights can also be a lightning bolt. The same kind of power that can, power your car engine to go off can also make a huge gasoline explosion, pipe bomb. We can recognize that when you're playing with feelings and emotions and spiritual attachment of this kind, you are playing with fire. We don't want to be a 3-year-old holding a gun. You got to take the gun away from the 3-year-old. We have to know what this dangerous but very useful and powerful device we have in our hands is. We have to go to gun safety training. We have to learn how to hold that gun properly, how to only fire it when we precisely know where the bullet is going to travel. We have to know how to handle the explosive power that sits in our palms right now, because we have something very dynamic and powerful here, and no one can deny it. It's almost like having an atomic bomb in your backyard. What we hold in our hands here with CPI has so much ability to blossom. It's so much power. We have to use it carefully. We have to use it strategically. We have to use it in a way that doesn't blow up in our face. And I want everyone to know about that. And I want everyone to be aware of that. And I want everyone to understand that as we continue to carry out our operations, be aware of what I'm talking about. If the love hits you and it's overwhelming, that's what it is. If you have the anxiety of going all in because you know that you could lose it, you could lose your mind in love, be aware of that. Be aware of what we're doing here. We should keep a clear head. We should be honest and know about what we're doing. And those are my opening remarks for you tonight. A little earlier than we usually are on here, but that's fine. I just wanted to share these words with you about what we're doing with the Center for Political Innovation and why it is so powerful and why it is so important.